Okay, perfect. All right. Let me move some stuff around here. All right, cool. Well, everyone, welcome. We're doing part 2 of our strategic partner next gen sales training. And what I wanted to do today is to kind of just start out by going through some of the basics that we learned last time, just so we're all on the same page here. And then we'll get into some of the new stuff. So we'll take it as far as we can today, and then we'll just continue on in the next episode, which I think is in a couple weeks. So one of the things we learned last time is that flying by the seat of your pants precedes crashing by the seat of your pants, right? It's easy to fly by the seat of your pants, but it's also very can result in some pretty awful situations. And I also want you all to remember that this concept that we're teaching here is that you're not selling a thing. You're selling the results of what that thing does for them, which is important. It's an important distinction because what we do in sales too often is we tend to oversell ourselves, oversell the product, and the customer doesn't care about any of that. None of it, right? All they care about is what are you going to fix for me? What is it going to do for me? Yet salespeople tend to have this focus on themselves and how good they are and how good their company is. I'm not saying you don't talk about that, but it's not the majority of what your presentation should be. So you want to become a problem finder and a solver, not a product pusher. Remember last time we talked about the drug called hopium, where you kind of hope things happen because you're pushing products on people and that's not what they want. So problem finding is where you need to start. It's at the core of all sales, and it comes down to asking the right question at the right time. That's it. It's a very simple process. And the goal is you want to find problems that the customer never even knew they had. That's the secret to sales. If you can find something that they didn't realize was a problem, bring it to their attention, and then get them to buy into the fact emotionally that that's an issue and that needs to be solved, you are way ahead of the competition. And we do that through something called neuro emotional persuasive questions. It's really complicated, name, but it's actually really simple because what we're doing is we're getting the customer to persuade themselves, right? You shouldn't have to be selling. You should be persuading them to sell themselves on this. And the questions that we ask aren't designed to get people to say what you want them to say, or they're not just surface level questions. You want to really bring out their inner truths, their external truths, their emotional state, their emotional feelings. It's almost like being a psychologist because you really want to tie into that because those are the things that make people buy, right? Think about it when you go to a grocery store. When you go get in line at a grocery store, what is always, always, always at the checkout? Anyone?
Impulse buys.
Of course. Candy bars, mostly candy, right? And the reason for that is because they know it's all emotional, right? They're masters at sales and marketing. They understand that these are emotional things that people buy on. So there are these various phases that we're going to go through. This is kind of the presentation of kind of how you're going to go about talking to the customer. So the first stage is called connection stage. And really what it is it's just a short period at the very beginning of the prezo where you're just trying to connect with the person, right? And in the old days, people used to connect through like rapport building. How's the weather down there? And I still get caught doing some of that stuff. But it doesn't work anymore, right? People know it's nonsense, right? So you want to put the focus on them in that connection stage, not on you. Then you move into the engagement stage. That's where you're starting to uncover what's their situation. Are they aware of their problems? Are they aware of the solution? Are they aware of the consequences of them not making a decision? Think about how important that is. And then qualifying them to just see if they're ready to take that and make that change. Next stage is something called the transitional stage, where you're going to transition at that point into presenting what you do, right? Then next step is presentation stage. That's where you're going to basically give features and benefits and sell yourselves a little bit. That you're going to want to go to in your head, you're going to want to make that the majority of the presentation, but it shouldn't be the majority of the presentation. It needs to be a smaller piece. Remember, you were getting them to buy into this to sell themselves. Then after the presentation stage, that's the commitment stage where you're asking, committing sort of questions. You're getting to the fact of, hey, listen, let's make some decisions on what you're going to do here. And that is sort of the framework. So I think we'll definitely get through number one, the connection stage. Hopefully we'll get through all of number two today too, but if not, we can continue on in the next session. But just think of the NAPQ phases as allowing you to control the process. It's driven me crazy for years. I mean, Mike, you knew me back at Nexiva. It even drove me crazy there. We had like 45, what I would consider great channel managers. And man, most of them couldn't sell. They had no idea. Because people fall into this kind of order taking routine. And I can't even blame them because we didn't give them anything to go on. Right? We just kind of assume, oh, you've been a tenured channel manager, you must know how to do this stuff. But I think we all have to take a step back and look at ourselves and say, listen, maybe we don't know this stuff, or maybe there's a better way of doing it. And it's important to understand kind of old school versus new school. So if you look at I love these two graphics, right? Because in the old school, the base of the foundation of your pyramid is like building just ridiculously fake rapport, price-based thinking, you're asking surface level questions, you're telling about the features and benefits, and then you get sale pressure, right? And there's nothing worse. I used to, when I was managing channel managers, nothing worse than, and I would tell the channel managers, I better never hear anybody going to a partner and saying, hey, what can you close this month? I have a new quota I gotta hit. Mike and I know we've talked about this before. It's like they should never ask somebody that because
We don't have quotas. We don't have quotas.
Exactly. You don't care when it closes, right? Could be this month or next month or the month after. It doesn't matter. So, but that's why the model is broken. In this new method, it's sort of turned upside down. You're spending 85% of your time engaging with the customer, getting them to let their guard down, building trust, finding problems, building a gap of where they're at today versus where they should be so they can see that gap. And 10% of it is the presentation and 5% is getting them to commit. So it's really upside down of kind of what most people know. So it's going to take a little bit. It's not going to feel comfortable at first for everybody. It's not going to it's not like anything new. It's not, I don't think it's going to come naturally, but the more you practice this stuff, the better you're going to get at it. And remember, it's a crawl, walk, run approach, everyone. Like it's just, you got to start, babies, first start to walk by starting to learn how to stand, right? And they fall and they try to stand, they fall. Eventually one day they can just stand there and you're like, whoa, that's wild. Well, it's not wild. It's just practice. That's it. It's then getting stronger. So let's talk about the connection stage. So this is the first thing that you do, and the goal here at the very beginning of what you're doing is to put the focus on them and take it off of you. Because, as much as a lot of salespeople have big egos, right? I know I have an ego. I think everyone does. And we always want to talk about ourselves. What makes us so good? Why are we the best thing since sliced bread? But these customers don't care. They don't care. What they care about is themselves, because that's human nature. So you gotta go with that flow. So understand that this phase is the first very beginning, and the first 7 to 12 seconds is a critical time because the customer is picking up on verbal and nonverbal cues. And the nonverbal should scare you a little bit more than the verbal, right? Because it's kind of easy to not say something verbally that is going to cause dismay. But nonverbal cues are much more difficult, right? It should, a little roll of the eyes here, or, pay attention to something else over there while you're talking to the customer. These are all things that the customer picks up. And, what tends to happen is that salespeople come across as aggressive, needy, and attached. And one of the biggest things I took away learning this stuff is that you need to become detached from the sale. Because the more you act to the customer like this is super important for you, the more likely they are to dig in their heels because they're like, well, are they doing it for them or are they doing it for me? Are they doing it for their commission or are they trying to help me? Those are the things that start going through people's heads. So if you come across as aggressive, needy, and attached, what it does is it triggers the customer's brain into one of two things. Neither are good. Either fight or flight. That is not a good place to start a presentation, right? Because you're going to put the customer in a position where right away you're fighting a losing battle. And what do you hear? Well, you hear things like, I'm too busy to talk about it now. Can you call me back another time? I don't need anything. We already have it locked in. These are the types of things you hear when there's that fight or flight response. It should be a trigger if you hear these things that something went wrong in that first 7 to 12 seconds. Now, if you come across as neutral, calm, and detached, well, I'm guessing you can guess what comes next. Well, what it does is it triggers them to become so curious that they feel like they must engage. So the big bullets here are in this intro stage, in this connection phase, you have to come across as detached from the sale. And I think most often agents and sub-agents do a pretty good job at that. I think because, you guys, if you look at your model, many times, you're not tied to a particular provider. So you kind of come across a little detached already. Like, hey, listen, we're just going to bring you multiple solutions that we think will work for you. And then, Mr. Client, you decide what's best. So I think that gives you a little leg up over standard kind of salespeople. You want to refocus on whether the prospects have problems that we can actually solve. And then just remember this, the moment they feel you're selling, they shut down. So it needs to be a conversation with the customer about uncovering needs, uncovering problems, talking about how we can solve those problems, etc. So this is just an example I put together of maybe how a connection phase could go, right? And keep in mind, it's not meant to be scripted, right? This is you have to play with this, and you have to come up with your own, your own things, what feels good for you. But you can say something like, "Hey, it looks like you booked an appointment with us to look at possible outside help with your tech stack, and you want to make sure that the business is getting the best bang for the buck. Is that right?" So right away you're just saying, "Hey, listen, this is why we're here. Just want to make sure we're both on the same page." Then prospect responds with, whatever they respond with. And then you'll notice here, we're asking a lot of questions, right? So what was it you guys were going over internally that caused you to want to look into this further? Now, this is kind of generic, right? Because I don't have, there's not like, we're not talking, I'm not doing this as like it's a particular product you're trying to sell, but you can fill in the blank. So you could say, "Hey, what was it that, that was happening internally at the company that caused you to take a look at new bandwidth for the company? Are your apps using too much net bandwidth? Are you having drops? Is it customer service? What made you want to look into this further?" Then they respond, then you can come up with something. Well, just so you know, and before I go into the rest of this, I want you to understand when you talk to a customer, there's this thing called I forget what they call it, but it's basically longer than normal pauses where you want to get the customer to hear certain things. So anytime you see the three dots is a place I think you should have a little bit longer than normal pause to kind of make a point. So in this case, I would say something like, "Oh, just so you know, these first calls are really, really pretty basic. It's really more for us to understand what you're doing to manage the program process, whatever you're doing now, the results you're getting from that, compared to what you might really be wanting, to see what that gap looks like. And then towards the end, if you feel like this might be what you're looking for, well, we can talk about possible next steps. Would that help you?" So you see how unassuming I am? I'm being like, I'm not pushing down their throat. I'm trying to set it up as, "Hey, listen, I just I just want to understand what it is you're doing, what the gap looks like. And then, if we can figure something out, maybe it's something we can work on together." And I think that really it takes the customer and sets them at ease, because right away you're not like saying, "Well, we're the best, and we'll definitely solve your problem," and we don't even know what your problem is, right? We really don't know. Most times customers don't even know what their problem is. They think they may know, but when you start questioning it, and you'll see as we get deeper into this, we're going to start asking more and more questions about digging deeper, and as far as we can go. But does that sort of make sense to you all? Like, you're just trying to connect with them, show them that you care about what their issues are, and just kind of detaching from it a little bit and just letting them know, "Listen, I'm just here to help, and I would love to do that if we can find a way to help you." Make sense?
Absolutely.
Any questions at all on this? Well, just feel free to interject if you do. So notice though, if I go back here and the words that I've got on the page, it's a lot of is disarming of the prospect. I'm using neutral words. I'm not being, I'm noting, note the non-assumptiveness of it. I'm not assuming I know what the customer issue is. And again, we're lowering sales resistance, lowering it, where most people increase sales resistance with, sort of the old school methods. So that's that connection phase. Super, super simple. There's not a lot to it. As a matter of fact, I've got this whole document on all these different phases with lots of different examples. When we're done with this class, I'm going to give it to you guys. And you guys can, it would be a good, helpful resource, I think. All right. Stage 2. Let's talk about this. This is called the engagement stage. So we've already connected with the customer, and now we want to get into the engagement stage. This is the foundation of everything you're going to do going forward. Okay. And the engagement stage actually has 5 subcategories within it. And they kind of work like this. First phase is you want to understand what their current situation is. Second stage, now you're trying to figure out what their problems are, why they have those problems, and the most important thing is, how is it affecting them? Because here's the thing, I think we tend in technology to make things too like when you're in a hospital and everything's so clean and nice, and you smell alcohol everywhere. We kind of make it that way in sales, and we're not really understanding like how, like, you have this problem, how is it affecting you? And when I say you, I mean, how is it affecting the company? How is it affecting you personally? Because if you can get them to the place of the core of what the problem is doing to them, the sales process becomes super simple. Because now you're going to go back to that later, and you say, listen, if we can solve this for you, guess what? You're not going to have to work on the weekends anymore, or very rarely, because I know it's a big problem for you right now. So, you're making it so personal. Third step, you're going to find, so first step is what's their situation. Second step, what's their problem? How is it affecting them? Third step is solution awareness. So basically help them understand, once we solve their problems with our solutions, what does that mean for them? Then you go into the consequence questions. Now, this is something I've never really heard salespeople do, but I love it. It's brilliant. So you've helped them identify, what the situation is, what the problem is, what the solution is, or the awareness of the solution. And then you're talking about, well, what's the consequence if you don't do anything? Not many sales reps that I've ever heard do that. Some really good ones I've heard, but very few. Because now what you're doing is you're setting them up so they can't come back to you and say, or I shouldn't say they can't. They likely won't come back to you saying, you know what, we're just going to push this off for 6 months. You're trying to eliminate these things from happening in that consequence question section. And then you go into qualifying questions. It just confirms how important it is for them to make the change. You see how this is working psychologically? Like, you're literally, it's almost like, good public speakers can get in front of a group and tell a great story. And that story, they take the audience on a ride with them in that story. This is basically what you're doing here, is you're just taking them on a sales ride, right? You're every little nuance that needs to be covered and every little issue that may happen is being handled in this engagement section. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to close 100% of the business, right? I mean, let's be real. Sometimes things don't work, right? But what you're doing is you're setting the bar where you can achieve it, because you're doing your best to kind of set the customer on this journey of understanding what the situation is, what's the problem for them, how do they solve it, what are the consequences if they don't, and then qualifying just how important it is for them to make a change. So let's get into this first section, which is situation questions. The goal here is to allow you to get facts about your prospect's current situation. That's it. So some of things that we've uncovered or we're going to uncover here is that we have to help them find out what their real situation is, because many prospects don't even know what their problems are until you help them uncover them. So, these situation questions help us understand their current situation. They help the prospect discover problems that they might not be aware of. And think of this as fact finding, right? You're just fact finding. And the most important part is you're starting to build a gap of where they are versus where they want to be. That is one of the most crucial things in sales, right? How do you build the gap? And, like you see in this picture, there's this guy and there's this crack in the earth right there. And he's looking like, well, how the heck do I get across that? And that's a real problem. Like, it's a real problem in sales. If they don't even know that there's a gap where they are versus where they need to be, we need to help them uncover that and grow that gap. So you can ask, 3 or 4 situational questions to kind of get into it. So these are just some examples. Like, what are you doing now? What are you using now? How long have you been doing this? What got you involved with this company that you don't like? What does their process look like? Can you walk me through what you're doing now too? Mike, you said cybersecurity. Can you walk me now through what you're doing now to protect the business from criminals? How are you doing it? Can you walk me through what your process is? How many blanks do you have so I have more context? So how many users do you have so I have more context? It's you're really digging here. It's like almost like going to a doctor, and if you go to a doctor and you say, "Oh my gosh, I'm having headaches all the time," you think they're just going to say, "Oh, okay, here, let me write you a prescription." No, not a chance, right? Because they're going to start asking more questions. Well, do you have dizziness? Let's take your blood pressure. Let's just see if that has anything to do with it. Like, they're gonna dig as much as they can, usually a couple questions, to kind of see if there's anything that sticks out. But you're using, in your case, as salespeople, you're using these situational questions to understand where they're at today, and you're starting to understand and build the gap of where they can be. So some sample situational questions would go something like this. So you mentioned that you're having some issues with cybersecurity. Can you tell me a little bit more on that? Right? You don't use yes or no questions. And actually I would even change this to say, can you please tell me more about that? Because if you do yes or no questions or surface level questions, what are you going to get?
A binary answer.
Exactly. Or a surface level answer, Alan, right? Which is not helpful. Not in sales. So I would actually change this. I'm going to change this before I send this out to you guys. But, so you've mentioned that you're having some issues with cybersecurity. Do me a favor, tell me more about that. Because you really want to get them talking, and you want to hear what they have to say. So they'll respond with something, and then you can ask like, "Hey, well, what are you doing now to try to resolve these issues? How long you been doing that for?" Right? So, and you guys know, many customers, when you say, "Hey, what are you doing now to try to resolve these issues?" They'll either have a real long story of all the stuff they tried, or most, I think, are going to say, "Well, we haven't done much." Right? So again, you're building the gap. You're understanding, okay, there's a massive gap here that we can help with. Then they respond, and then you can say something like, "I'm curious." And by the way, "I'm curious" is a tremendously powerful 2 words, because it shows that you actually care about what they're doing. I'm curious. How has that been working for you so far? Because, you want to get them to start coming out with, well, it's not working, it hasn't been great, or, our team just doesn't have the time to handle these cybersecurity things. But I love that I'm curious. So any questions on situational awareness or comments even?
Real quick, Ira. First off, man, I think this is great. I probably put the three dots right after I'm curious.
Yes,
But
100%.
right? But I do gotta say this, and it's simple. We all know it, but I know we've all been on calls where sometimes we ask a question and they're answering it, and somebody just wants to talk over them. Oh, yeah, I got you. Well, just sit back and listen because
Yes.
the more they talk, the more they're gonna tell you about what's going on, and eventually the more gonna trust you. And that's just basic. And I say that because, like, even us as a team, we've been on a call and I've had other people that are like three of us on the call, and one of them will want to answer right away. Like, bro, just let him finish. Let's hear what he has to say. So I think that, and we all know it, but I think that just listening to the person itself is also huge. Don't jump the gun ready to ask another question.
Yeah, and Henry, I think that is a very, very it's a very good comment because just so y'all know, I struggle with that big time. Like, like literally, while Henry was talking, no kidding, in my stomach, I was feeling it. I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to say something, and I and but I think that's quite normal for great salespeople, right? Because they feel like they have to control everything. But it's a very, even though consciously I know I have to do it, I also consciously know that I always have to work on it, Henry, because it's hard, right? But you're right. The more you get them talking, the more you're going to have to go on, right? You're
Yeah,
building
exactly.
that.
And the more information you'll have to control the conversation. But no, you're right. Sometimes I want to jump in right off the top, like, oh yeah, yeah, we got that. you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's something we all need to work on a little bit every now and then. But no, man, this is great.
I
On
completely
to
agree with
just
both
a
of you.
side.
Sorry,
Go ahead, Jen.
Go ahead, Christy.
I'll come back in after you.
The
I
battle
was
of
going
the
to say I completely
Southerners.
agree with both of you. Good point. We're both talking over each other. Sometimes I get really excited when I hear things from customers that I tend to want to jump in and talk to them. So I do the same thing. I really have to work on that, Henry. It's a great point. Really listening to your customers, you'll get a lot more business out of them if you just sit and listen.
Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say to that was just, sometimes when you're listening, to someone and you're trying to think, oh, what am I going to say next? How am I going to say this? What am I going to jump in here with? Then you miss something that was really said because you're too busy contemplating what you're going to say in response to that versus completely absorbing what somebody's actually trying to tell you. So it's those pauses. You got to pause.
Yes, yes, 100%. And just asking these deep questions that make them really think and make them really talk to you about what is going on, right? What is going on for them? I mean, I love the question of, hey, this problem that you describe, how does it affect you? And you'll see, we're going to get to that here. But, how does it affect you, Mr. or Ms. IT person, right? How does it affect you? And you do these things and you are going to set yourselves aside from all the other salespeople out there because they're all doing it that old school way. So, okay, so that was situational awareness. So now let's go on to problem awareness. So, so we made the connection. We've talked a little bit about their situation, got them to describe what the situation is. Now we want to move into problem awareness. And, we're trying to build the case of what their real problems are, what the root causes are, and how they're negatively affecting the person. We want to get to that because that is what's going to tie them to you. Because no one asks, no one cares because they only care about themselves and their paychecks as a salesperson generally. So when you're really digging in and saying, wow, like, how's this affecting you? Right. And you got to be able to say things like you really care. So let's get into these problem awareness. So what you're doing now is you're continuing to build the gap from where your prospect is now and where they want to be. So we're doing that through multiple methods. But, number one, understand that problem solving is not enough to give you a competitive advantage, right? Because nothing personal, guys, but almost any agent can solve a customer's problem. I mean, anyone disagree? I mean, there may be some out there that suck, but most of them they're gonna solve the problem one way or another, right? So that's just not enough to stand out and get the competitive advantage. You have to be a problem finder. That's where these people are not good, because what they're in their heads, what they're saying is, customer told me they have this problem. I must solve that problem. Therefore, I win. But I think of it as, I uncovered this problem from the customer. They knew they had it, but I'm going to dig a little bit deeper to see if I can find some other things that they didn't even aware that may be related or maybe not related that are problems too. And I've always said this, like, if you can find a problem that the customer didn't know they have, you're going to win. You're going to win because most people aren't going to take the time to do it. And, it's really essential to realize that most of your prospects don't even know they have the problem when they first talk to you. Or maybe they do, maybe their internet sucks and they're going down 3 times a week. So they know there's a problem there. But when you start digging, you find out, like, what is it really affecting in the business? There may be other ancillary problems that are happening because of that bandwidth issue that they didn't even think of. And now you're using it to help them understand, like, okay, the problem is much bigger than just your company going down 2 times a week, right? You may uncover that through chatting that whoever they're using doesn't have DDoS protection on their circuits. I mean, I don't know if any of you watch, politics, but last night Elon Musk did a thing with Donald Trump on X. And for the first 45 minutes, I couldn't believe this, but they claimed that X was getting a DDoS attack, and the whole website was freaking down. So maybe it was true. I don't know. No idea if it was true or not. But all I kept thinking is, dang, how do I talk to Elon Musk? Because, if they can't control a DDoS attack, who are they using for bandwidth? So maybe one of you guys want to reach out to Elon. You might get a nice big bandwidth deal. But again, it's essential to realize that most prospects don't even know they have a problem when they first talk to you. And if we can't help them find problems and have them, like, emotionally engage with the problems, it's impossible for them to feel any sense of need or urgency to buy from us. So you notice this gap's bigger, right? Because we're using this to build a bigger gap for the customer. So how do we do that? Well, these are just some basic types of questions that you can ask. Do they like their present situation? What's their past history? Again, you're going to ask probably 3 or 4 questions, maybe a few more. It's not like baking a cake, right? When you bake a cake or any baking, you have to be precise. Otherwise, you don't get what you thought you were going to get. But in this world, it's not precise, right? So, do you like what you're doing with this? Do you want to do this? What makes you feel like this current provider is not enough? What kind, what do you mean by that? Can I ask what you mean when you said, hey, Mr. Customer, you said, the customer service is not good where you're at right now. Well, what do you mean by that? You know, like, what do you mean by that? I don't know what that means. I'm not sure I understand. When you said blank, could you expand on that for me? You know, you're clarifying. You know, let me see if I understand what you want or what you're saying. And then you rephrase kind of what they, you know, what they said. And again, it shows that you're actually listening to the customer. Going back to what Henry said, right? You got to be a listener. You know, how many ears do you have?
2,
How many mouths do you have?
1.
Use them accordingly, right?
It's true. Yeah. 100%.
You thought that was a trick question.
Well, my wife says sometimes I talk out my ass, so you know.
So you can also ask some things with what we call precision probing questions. So you want to use these types of things to drive deeper when the client isn't being clear. Because you all know, sometimes you get on with a customer and they're like, they don't really want to tell you anything, or they don't even really know, and it's like pulling teeth, right? So you can ask things like, well, how long has it been going on? You know, has that had an impact on you? In what way, though? You know, like they say, yeah, it's had an impact on me, whatever, blah, blah, blah. You say, well, what way? Right? You're digging deeper. You're getting down. It's like when you go to the dentist and they got to pull a tooth, you know, they have to go all the way down and get that root out of there. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of problems. Well, it's the same in sales, right? So you can ask these probing questions. You know, yeah, things like, you don't sound so sure about that. What don't you really like? Right? You're just, again, conversational, and it allows you to drive deeper when the client isn't being completely clear. So here are some sample scripts for problem awareness. So first thing is, you know, so what makes you feel like your current solution to blank is not enough? Again, very open-ended, right? Get them to talk, not yes or no questions. They'll respond. Could you please expand on that for me? You know, maybe give me a few specific examples. Digging, getting the root of it. And then, well, let me see if I understand what you want or what you're saying. And then you repeat back to the issue to the customer and ask, if is that perception correct? Am I really understanding it? So that's the section on that very first section. Any questions on this so far?
No.
Okay. I think what we're going to do is we're going to go through one more section because we have about 15 minutes left. I'll open it up to any questions, then we'll continue on in our next from here. But so the next is solution awareness. So, you know, you've already went through that first initial process. Now you have to get down to the solution awareness. So what you're doing is you're getting your prospect involved and causing them to emotionally attach themselves to solving the problem. I'm going to give an example. I know Christy likes fishing, right? So when you go fishing and you get a nibble, what's the first thing you need to do?
You need to wait. You need to kind of
Wait.
let it kind of pull just a little. You don't jerk right then.
Nope.
You don't jerk right
Nope.
then.
But there becomes a point where you have to set that hook, right? You got to make sure that it takes the hook. And that is what this is doing, is you're solving the problem by getting them to be emotionally attached. Now, that fish is probably really emotionally attached once that hook is in its mouth. But anyway, so there are two parts to solution awareness. Number one, you have to focus on what they've done in the past to try to solve these problems. And what that does is it gets them to see that maybe they haven't done much yet, or not, not enough. And it brings home the realization as to how long it's been that they've had the problem or issue. Okay, so part one is focusing on what they've done in the past and how effective really were those things that they've done. Part two focuses on what their future will look like. So you're looking at the past, and how that worked out for them. Then you're looking at the future and how we're going to solve those newfound problems. So it helps them see what their future looks like once the problems are solved, and it allows them to see their current state versus the objective state, which is in the future. This kind of goes back to building that gap, right? We're building the gap of, you know, what they've done versus what they need to be doing. And you're getting them to see that, listen, there's a gap here that we need to overcome. And once they come to that realization, it becomes much easier to sell, because now they're emotionally bought in. So, you know, if you look here, basically on the left, you have their current situation, right? So what their future looks like once their problems are solved. So at the top, you have currently where they're at. Then in the middle, you have this big gap. And then at the bottom, you have where they want to be. It's called their objective state. So, you know, you want to ask solution awareness questions so you know, if you don't ask them, they're not going to be able to see what their future can look like with you. So they're going to have no urgency to buy. So you can't miss this piece. You can't miss it. And if you do miss it, then you're going to get objections like, well, we want to think it over. If you ever get a customer that says that, it means you didn't do a good job building the gap. You didn't show them how they can get over that gap.
So real quick. So in other words, what you're saying, Ira, is you have to let them know that there is a gap, right? So you reveal the gap to them, and then you have to make them feel the gap.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah,
Because that's how they'll buy emotional. They gotta feel the pain, they gotta feel where they're at, and they gotta feel the joy of where you're gonna bring them and how that's gonna make them feel safe and better.
Yep. So, like, look at these things. If you hear any of these things, you did not do a good job at this. Anyone here, I want to think it over, or I'll get back to you. Typical in sales. I need to keep looking around. I need to do more research. All of a sudden, they don't have the money for this, right? You know, most times when they say these types of things, that's not real. That's not real. They're saying it because you didn't do a good job at helping them understand the gap, right?
So you didn't set the hook, right, Ira?
You didn't set the hook, right? So some sample here. So, okay, so let's suppose we're able to solve the issue of your bandwidth provider, you know, going down multiple times a week, so that your company could achieve, you know, more consistency with your customers or whatever they told you. And know that if anything big did happen, that you'd be completely covered. Knowing that we had that in place, what would that do for you guys? Right? So you're getting them to, like, sort of understand, okay, listen, there's this solution here, and if we had it in place, they'd be covered. And are you buying into that, Mr. Customer? You know, you're taking them on that kind of emotional, getting ready to set the hook. And then they answer with something and say, well, what would that do for you personally, though? Again, you're trying to get that emotion, right? And what does it mean for them? And then you can say something, but besides this, you know, how do you besides this issue that we talked about, how do you see this benefiting you the most, though? So now you're starting them you're taking them on this, like, this journey of, hey, listen, there's an answer here, but at the end of the day, how's it going to benefit you? Because then, you know, the IT person or whoever you're talking to may say, well, gosh, man, I mean, I have 5 other things that the owner wants me to do in the business that I have no time for. I'll be able to get to those things. You see how you're getting them to feel? You're getting them to feel what's going on here. Let's go through one more section, and then we'll call it. So any questions on this section here? The solution awareness. All right. So next section is consequence section. So, you've got them to understand that there's this gap and there's a solution to it and how it makes them feel. But now you got to get them to think about the consequences of not doing anything. Happens a lot in our business, right? Sometimes they push projects off for a long, long time. And I would venture to guess it's because we didn't do a good job at getting them to identify what is the consequence of not doing this. So the importance of these questions are, once they feel and see what the future looks like, which we just did, we want to rip that away from them by asking consequence questions. We want to get them to defend themselves on why it's so important to change now, not later. And we want to empower the customer to realize that they can change their own situation by making a decision now or in the near future. So some sample questions are, well, what if you don't do anything about this problem? And the situation gets worse. And you notice how it says challenging tone? Because you want to challenge them here. You want to get them thinking, oh, man, I didn't think about that. Or have you thought about what would happen if you don't do anything about it? Have you considered the possible ramifications if you don't do anything? What are you going to do if nothing changes and you keep doing the same old thing for the next year and nothing changes? Right? Again, it's trying to build a lot of emotion into it, but at the same time challenging them. You're ripping away that solution and you're saying, hey, listen, we've identified there's a gap here and we can get you there. But if you didn't do anything, what does it mean? And people will come to realization here. And this will, I can't say it'll eliminate, but it will reduce the number of people say, yeah, call me back in a month. It'll reduce that greatly. So sample. So what happens if you don't do anything about this, though? And you keep having the same issue over and over? They'll respond. And what about the business disruptions? How would that work out for the business? So you notice I've got this challenging tone. And what about the business disruptions? How would that work out for the business? You're just trying to be a little aggressive here. Do you want to have to go through all of that if you didn't have to? Right? And now you're going back to curious tone. Right? Like, I'm really curious. Like, would you really want to go through that? But I mean, even if you didn't have to, you're trying again. You see, I'm saying this over and over again, but it's really important. It's like these emotional triggers are so key to this. And I believe that once we all get this down, we have a lot more fun selling. Because it's kind of taking, I think, what we talked about in the first session about conversational sales and taking it to the next level, but having real conversations. So that's kind of it for today. But I do want to just wrap it up with what we learned. So we learned the connection stage, how to take that first 7 to 12 seconds, put the focus on them. We learned about the first 4 sections of the engagement stage. So assessing their situation, assessing the problem, trying to find out if there are any other problems that they have that we weren't aware of, but more importantly, how it's affecting them. We talked about how we help them identify the gap in the solution awareness and what it looks like in their world once their problems are solved. And then we rip it away. And now we're challenging a little bit. We're saying, hey, listen, if you don't do this, what does it mean? And so it's really effective. And then next time we're gonna move into the transition stage, the the presentation stage, and the commitment stage. But with that, we got like 4 minutes left. I just want to see if anyone has any questions, comments, or anything before we go.
Or the only thing that I would add to it is I think depending on the prospect, the customer that you're chatting with, I mean, whatever that vertical looks like, to know what is potential challenges in that is always good. I mean, you need to understand that vertical and who you're talking with to help even, make some of these questions and try to guide it through the story as you stated.
Yeah.
Just my only feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hopefully you guys are getting something out of this. I know I have quite a bit. We're going to continue on. We'll continue on. I don't remember when it is. I think it's like 2 weeks or something like that, 2-3 weeks or something. But and forward it to your teams. Anyone you want to come. I'm going to get these all published somewhere. I don't know where yet, so people can retake the class afterwards or take it if they couldn't make it. I know some people couldn't make it today, but I appreciate your time. Hopefully you're enjoying this stuff. I'm enjoying doing it, and I think it's going to help us all.
Yeah, thank you, Ira. Appreciate you taking the time to do this, man. It helps everybody.
All right, guys. Have a great day.
Good, Ira.
Thank you, Ira.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ira. See ya.